Hello and welcome to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, TJ Mabarty. It is Monday, February 19th. We are coming off of the NBA All-Star Weekend, so we will be starting off with some conversations about that. I know that a lot of people were disappointed with how the weekend went, so I'll just be giving my thoughts on all of that before sticking with the NBA and giving my reasons for why NBA contenders, finals contenders that is, will or will not actually win the finals. Then we're going to be switching to the NFL, where tomorrow franchise tag decisions are officially open for teams can extend the franchise tag to their star players, their upcoming free agents. So I will give my thoughts on what teams should do regarding that. And then finally, we are going to end off the show talking some college basketball. The selection committee this weekend gave their bracket preview for the top 16-ish teams in the league. And then immediately after that, essentially, we had some massive games from the number one and number two teams. So we'll just be breaking down this past weekend in college basketball and sort of looking ahead as well as to whether or not we are potentially looking at a repeat champion and everything that comes with that. But before we get into everything, just a reminder to like and follow wherever you may catch us, and for our live viewers to use the link that is scrolling across the bottom ticker if you feel like donating or tipping or anything like that, making the show as interactive as possible with your questions. So without further ado, getting into our first topic here, talking about the All-Star Weekend in the NBA. So like I sort of alluded to, it was pretty disappointing, I think, from my perspective, and I think that a lot of people share that point of view as well. But at this point, it's just sort of a tough situation because I don't think that there's really a ton to do it. As far as, we'll start with the game itself, where the East dominated the West. They scored over 200 points, and it was maybe a little bit of a surprise just based off of, you look at that Western Conference All-Star team, and there is a legitimate chance that every single one of those players could end up being a Hall of Famer. But they end up getting destroyed because realistically, the amount of effort that was put into this game was very low, and that's why a lot of people sort of had concerns and complaints about this game. The TNT alternate cast with Draymond Green and Charles Barkley, and sort of the energy, and I wouldn't even call it drama, just like the banter back and forth between them was honestly the most entertaining part of the game. There was a stretch early in the game where Tyrese Halliburton, the hometown star in Indiana, he hit 5 straight three-pointers, and it was a good start there. But then really after that, the game was borderline unwatchable, and overall it wasn't entertaining. Lillard did end up taking home the MVP. He had a big weekend personally, winning the MVP, winning the three-point contest as well. But it again just was not a very compelling game, and it has a lot of people asking about whether or not there is any way to fix this. How do we fix this? And I'll start off by saying Anthony Edwards, who was an All-Star this year, gave a quote afterwards, and I think that it's pretty much calling it like it is, and not in a positive way for any fans who are hoping that this thing can get turned around. He said that this is their all-star break, and he said, this is a quote from him, "I don't think nobody wants to come here and compete." And it's, again, that level of competition and competitiveness that we're just lacking, and I'm not sure that there's really a way to get it back. Brian Windhorst was on ESPN earlier today talking about one of Commissioner Adam Silver's main priorities this season was to sort of bring some juice back to All-Star Weekend, and that did not happen. And so while he wants this to happen, and a lot of fans are really hoping that we can sort of turn this around. I just don't think it's a real reality because, I mean, he's not wrong. This is an all-star break. You play 82 games throughout the course of the season. Lots of back-to-backs, all that. And I know there are already going to be people saying, well, they get paid, tens of and hundreds of millions of dollars to play this sport, suck it up. And, that's fair. But at the same time, I can understand why, these stars don't want to overextend themselves during this break, because God forbid there were to be some sort of an injury, because you think about it, you want them to compete. And supposedly Doc Rivers was trying to actually coach up the team a little bit leading up to the game, but I don't think that, it just requires a certain level of preparation and practice to really be into it, because you don't want to get yourself hurt. If you get hurt during the All-Star game, that is likely in the long term going to affect your future money. And it's just, I really don't think that it's worth it for them to put in the effort. So as much as I would prefer to be watching a better product, I really can understand the players' perspective of why they don't want to really exert themselves in these cases. And, people make the argument of, well, you are paid all this money as it is, and you're being awarded an all-star title. So for the sake of that, you should feel obligated, is maybe a little bit of a stretch. But, there are people saying that you should feel like you need to put on a show. And the reality is they really don't owe us anything as fans. And, it's just one of those things where I know I sound sort of pessimistic about the idea of this ever coming back, and I feel like I'm, defending the players a lot, but the reality is, they have bigger things to worry about. This is that they are in the job of entertaining and playing sports, but it's still a job that requires a ton of effort and, physically expending yourself. And, this is the time where they usually get to, after, over 50% of the season, get a week or so to themselves and just sort of kick back more and hang out with one another, build relationships. And I think that more so the issue is the fact that the NBA tries to push it on us so much as it's this, big thing. And you have the other announcing crew that did it instead of the alternate cast, like Reggie Miller, Candace Parker. It's bad when anytime there is a hint of defense, they're pointing it out. And, I just think that it's one of those things. We're sort of past return here. Now, there are some ideas to potentially bring a little bit more juice back to the game. There's always a potential of trying to get, financial incentives here to pay the winning team more. Now, you're talking about all-stars here who, not that they're going to turn down free money or the chance at winning money, but they're already on, the most expensive contracts in the league. So I think that it's got to be interesting to see. Like, $1 million is $1 million for anybody, but I think that that's also such a small percentage of what their contracts are. How much are you really going to push them by throwing $1 million on the table there? I think that the most interesting concept to me would be doing a Team USA versus Team World. I think that, we've had a little bit of debates over the past year or so of, the NBA Finals being the World Championship, but it's only teams in America other than Toronto, and people were a little bit split on it. I feel like, there's so much talent internationally now that they maybe even have, probably the top players in the world as far as Giannis and Jokic and Luka, they're all international. I feel like if you put in a little bit of a nationality pride thing into it, players might be a little bit more compelled to compete. The other idea that's been thrown out there, Hassan Whiteside did an interview with Sideline Sources, and he talked about the idea of having it sort of baseball style or former baseball style of the team that wins gets home court advantage in the finals. Gotta say, I'm not really a fan of that idea. I think that it's a little bit unfair. Like, you work so hard during the 82 games that, for example, right? And this is something that was in the comments of that post that I saw. Someone pointed out the idea of, well, what if the Kings were to make the finals this year? And I know that the Western Conference lost, so this doesn't really mean anything anyways, but they are sort of in the realm of contenders. I don't have them in my personal list, but they are a very good team. Let's say they make the finals this year. They didn't even have an all-star in the game. So would they really deserve to get home court advantage because of what the other teams in the Western Conference did? I don't know. It's just an idea that was thrown out there. I'm not the biggest fan of it personally, but I mean, maybe it would get guys to compete more, because whether you think it's fair or unfair, it does have, real applications. And sure, you have players on the All-Star court that probably aren't really too concerned with who would have home court advantage in the finals. If you're on maybe a little bit of a middling team like a Scotty Barnes on the Raptors right now or a Trae Young on the Hawks. But it's an idea. I think that, all ideas should sort of be explored, at least based off of just the result of what we've been getting for this weekend that has just really lost its shine. And I think that, honestly, more so than the game itself, like, I don't really care about the game. I can understand why people might want to, but I kind of do side with the players a little bit more that, they're just going out, they're having fun. That's what it's about. It's about celebrating them. They sort of get to do so however they want. It's just the NBA stopped pushing it on us as this big thing when we know that it's not in reality. But my bigger complaint is with the dunk contest, because that has lost all of the excitement behind it. And there's, I think, a handful of different reasons for it. The first has to be sort of star participation within it. And you have Jaylen Brown come out this year, all NBA player last season. He decides to do it. And did he put out a great performance? No. But he gave a quote afterwards, said some people are afraid to get turned into a meme or whatever. I wanted to come out and have fun within it, and that's what I did. And, he did again, maybe a little bit of an underwhelming dunk with Tatum going over YouTuber, streamer Kai Cenat, and he wore a Terrence Clarke jersey, which, for those of you who don't know, Terrence Clarke was a top basketball prospect some years ago, but he unfortunately passed away at a very young age. And from Massachusetts, or I think he's from New England, and Jaylen Brown paid tribute to him wearing his jersey. I thought that was a cool thing. And you know what? He had fun with it. Was he great? No. But that's the thing, is he said he just wanted to have fun, and that's what he did. Where are all the other stars that, it is such a travesty, I feel like, that LeBron James has never been in a dunk contest. And, again, people can sort of give Jaylen Brown some, if you feel like it, give him negativity. I think it's a weird move, because we shouldn't be tearing down these star players that actually do participate in for once. But, he sort of was they had two G League players doing it. And Mac McClung, I don't want to speak down on him because he's been terrific the past 2 years. He's just about the only one who actually does really show up to this thing. And it's unfortunate that we are so reliant on G League players to, sort of do this thing. The fact that we had two this year with him and Jacob Toppin was good too. But, there's nobody else interested in doing it, that we are having to rely on these G League players so much. I mean, it's a little bit unfortunate that this is the situation. And I don't know if it's a stigma or what. I don't think there's a real injury concern. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have never heard of a player getting hurt in a dunk contest. I think that Jaylen Brown was onto it. I think that, guys are just so worried about being embarrassed. And that's just, I don't know, that's sort of a lame way to look at it, because you look at what the highlight of the weekend was, and it was Steph Curry versus Sabrina Ionescu, however you pronounce it. I think it's Ionescu. But that was an incredibly entertaining product to see. And when you look at it sort of big picture here, Steph Curry had almost very little to gain from this competition that they did. Greatest shooter ever in NBA history, going up against a woman from the WNBA. This has never been done before. There was a little bit of pride on the line there, and he was willing to do it because he knew it was a great product for, the NBA, the WNBA as well, and it ended up being a great performance from both ends. Sabrina and Steph both showed out. Steph comes away with the title there, but Sabrina was neck and neck with him, held her own, I should say. And I thought it was a really cool moment in basketball history. And, I think that it's something they should look to continue going forward with, because I talked about Caitlin Clark on the show on Friday. I think that, we can build up this WNBA product more. It's just about marketing it well enough and having stars like Sabrina, like Caitlin Clark, if she decides to come to the WNBA next year, I mean, she could get involved as well, and they could do some sort of other iteration of it. That would be really cool to see for me. Last thoughts here. I thought the Rising Stars tournament, again, also not very competitive, but I thought it was sort of cool. I liked the addition of the G League team. I was confused how it worked at first, because I watched when they drafted the players, and there were only 3 teams drafting. But I'm like, they're doing a tournament here? How does this work? And it's because Detlef Schrempf, he has a team full of G League players, including some G League Ignite guys that are potential NBA prospects, first-round picks in this upcoming draft. So I thought that, again, not that it was really, you can't take a ton away from it, but it was an introduction for guys like Matas Buzelis, who hits a game winner for the G League team, actually winning their first game, upsetting Wemby and Team Pau. And also, if you are somebody that's making fun of the G League, like I saw comments on this, like legit, if you're making fun of the G League players for actually putting in some effort in this game, then you are exactly what's wrong with why we're not having more people trying. Because it's like you get made fun of for participating and for trying. That's what Jaylen Brown's experiencing currently. It's like we are trying to fix this and have things be more competitive, more entertaining, and you're just, I don't know, you're tearing it down for what? It makes no sense to me, but I thought it was a cool idea bringing in the G League team, and, they ended up winning a game, so it was a cool thing. Benedict Mathurin was also very entertaining, another homegrown guy there in Indiana from the Pacers, and he was all over the place during this tournament. He was chirping at Jaden Ivey, saying that he couldn't guard him. He bet $25K on some free throws at the end of the game. He went to the free throw line. The target score was 40. They were at 38 points. Bet Paolo Banchero $25,000 that he would end the game on this pair of free throws, and he went 0 for 2. So a pretty funny moment there, but he scored 18 of the team's 40 points, including the game winner then, and he ends up winning MVP of the tournament. So, I feel like all in all, pretty forgettable weekend. You had some individual moments that stood out, and as a basketball fan, you sort of look for things like that, like some of the young bucks getting into it, trying to get the competitive juices flowing a little bit. But I don't really have any answers for the All-Star game itself, and it's interesting because Adam Silver, they are going through contract negotiations for the media. They want to sell themselves as a product. That's why they came up with the All-NBA rule to have that minimum number of games to be eligible for All NBA awards and such, it's because they need other media companies to be willing to invest in their product. And with the amount of load management we've seen for years, they wanted to give these companies and these platforms a reason to want to invest into their product. And this was sort of the one checklist item, the way that Windhorse put it on ESPN earlier today, that Adam Silver didn't really get to cross off. He limited the amount of load management that was going on in the league. He put on a pretty good product for the in-season tournament. This one still has a little bit of ways to go, so we'll see if they make any sort of adjustments for next year, or if we can ever really get this thing truly going. But I have my doubts, and I don't think that it is really all that big of a deal at the end of the day. I'm more worried about the actual games itself. You can complain about it, you can say it's bad, I'll agree with you, but I just don't know if there's really a feasible solution to all this. So, let me know what you guys think in terms of if there is any way to sort of get this thing going in a more competitive way. But I definitely have my doubts. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break. When we come back on the other side, we are going to be taking a look at some of the contenders for the finals in the NBA this year, and I will be giving my reasons why they will or will not win it this year. So stick with us. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Just wrapped up talking some NBA All-Star Weekend and the festivities that went on then. Now we are going to be looking more big picture on this NBA season and talking about some finals contenders. I will give you my reasons for why these teams will or will not win the finals. So I have two different tiers of contenders right now. These are similar to the power rankings that I did the other week. So my top tier contenders, I have the Celtics, the Nuggets, and the Clippers. I think those are the top three teams in terms of chances they actually win the finals. So we will start with going through all of them, starting with the Celtics. They have the best overall roster and the best starting lineup in the league. They have positive net ratings for all five of the starters when they're off the court, meaning that when they go to their bench unit, once individually these guys are off the court, between Tatum, Brown, Drew Holiday, Derek White, and Kristaps Porzingis, the team is still a positive net rating with them on the bench, which I think shows the level of depth, the level of flexibility that they have in terms of being able to play with different lineups. And as we sort of look into some of these other teams, that isn't necessarily the case. They are the number one team in net rating, in offensive rating, and number 3 in defensive rating, which hasn't been phenomenal for them this year. And even still, that number 3 feels high to me, but it's because the Celtics, when they made the finals a couple years ago, their defense was truly elite. I don't know if they necessarily have that same buy-in, night out. But, their numbers have very much improved over the course of the season. I think that it is a very good sign because them, like a bunch of these other teams, you can't really hang your hat on offense through a 4-round span. You can get away with it for a couple rounds at a time, but especially once you start playing some of these more elite defenses across from you, you are going to have to be able to get stops on your own. And the Celtics seem to be in position to be able to do so. Their defense is significantly better, I think, when Kristaps Porzingis is on the court. So sort of on that note, the reasons why they would not be able to win the finals, in my opinion, is health. And when I say health, really I mean Kristaps Porzingis, because, you have Al Horford to come off of the bench if you need, but he's going to be 38 years old in June, and he shot under 30% from 3 during the playoff run last year and 28% in the Eastern Conference Finals. Injuries have been something that have surrounded Kristaps Porzingis for years, and if you look back to last year, I know a little bit under the radar, but I think one of the things that went wrong for the Celtics was the fact that Malcolm Brogdon, another guy who had dealt with a lot of injuries, even going back to college, he had an extremely healthy season, and he ends up flaring up with, it was an arm or an elbow or a wrist or something like that in the playoffs. He was not himself. He wasn't the offensive factor that he was in the regular season after winning Sixth Man of the Year. So they end up losing him for a lot of that, and as a result, their offense definitely felt it in the playoffs. Kristaps is even more valuable than Brogdon was, and he does so on both sides of the floor. So, and you just see when you watch the Celtics, they are a significantly different team when they have Kristaps versus when they don't. But it's that, and the other reason why they wouldn't be able to, in my opinion, is falling into bad habits. They do this sometimes where they sort of chuck threes. They don't attack on the inside. That's another thing that Kristaps is very valuable for, is being able to provide that post presence. The Celtics as a whole have looked to do so more this year, but when we've seen them at their worst in the playoffs, it is shot selection, and that's sort of something that follows around Tatum and Brown a little bit as well. So those would be my reasons for why they can't. They are currently the betting favorites, but the other teams in this top tier to me, the Nuggets here, why they can, they have the best player in the NBA, in my opinion, in Jokic, the best duo in the league as far as a two-man game perspective, and everything between him and Jamal Murray. Jamal might even have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, not making the All-Star game again this season, but they won the championship last year, and they retained the majority of their rotation. So should be good from a personnel perspective, but on that note, why they can't, they don't have quite as much depth as they did last year. You lose Bruce Brown, who was a very valuable player, in my opinion, to their run. Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. are both down in efficiency this year, so you're going to have to rely a little bit more on the youth there. Christian Brown now in his second season. He was phenomenal for them last year in the playoffs. Peyton Watson as well has been playing big minutes for them, so you would probably expect that he's going to be on the court for them as well. The difference is Brown last year was more of a luxury because you had Bruce Brown, you had the rest of that team there, and this year he's a little bit more of a necessity. Now, is he specifically make or break for the Nuggets? No, but you do sort of have to rely on him, or you have to gamble with going with a shorter bench than you did last year. And obviously they would prefer to go in the direction of having Brown be an impact guy for them like he was last season. You look at the Nuggets this year, and they are currently a minus 11.3 net rating when Jokic is off the court. So I talked about the Celtics' ability to play with depth. The Nuggets don't necessarily have that this year. And top-end talent is absolutely there, but I worry about the bench a little bit. They're currently outside the top 10 in offensive and defensive ratings, but you sort of have to give them the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't seem like, Jokic and that team cares all too much about the regular season itself. The Clippers, the last team in this top tier for me in terms of contenders, they have an elite offense. They have a deep team. They have tons of top-end talent between that combination of Kawhi and Paul George and James Harden. And I've talked about the Clippers in the past. I just think that they have so many impactful role guys. I love Norman Powell. I think he's one of the best role players in the league. So, they have a lot of that talent to carry them to a championship, and that's what they did when they traded for Harden. They were just sort of stockpiling as much talent as they possibly could. As far as why they can't, health is obviously something that surrounds the Clippers as of even this iteration of them, but going back to the Lob City days as well. It just feels like they have a hard time getting all their guys clicking at the right time in the playoffs, specifically between Paul George and Kawhi. That's been the story of them. James Harden, it's a little bit more of a buy-in thing with him than injuries itself, but health, I think, could definitely play a factor in this. I also think that defense, they've been middle of the pack for the majority of the year, and they were really struggling in February going into the All-Star break. They were 23rd in defensive efficiency. Now, we still have flashes of that elite defense from Kawhi, from Paul George, but James Harden is a very bad on-ball defender. It's interesting the way that they run a lot of this small ball. They have solid players for their centers, but I think that when it comes to a matchup against a Lakers or Timberwolves or anything like that, there is a real chance that physicality could get the better of them. But the Timberwolves have been, if you look back the week before the All-Star break, the Timberwolves have been a very tough matchup for the Clippers, so I do worry about them in that sense. Other teams I have in the conversation of competing, I will run through these names a little bit quicker. But you have the Bucks, the Timberwolves, the Suns, the Sixers, the Knicks, and the Heat. Now, starting at the top there, the Bucks, why they obviously have the superstar power between Giannis and Dame. I talked a little bit about the struggles of Dame over the recent stretch, has been shooting very poorly since the start of the new calendar year. I think he was sub 30% from behind the three-point line. And obviously that Grizzlies game was really ugly. Late game offense wasn't great. He runs right into Brook Lopez. A lot of people are online, at least, talking about the lack of chemistry really and spacing that comes with it between Damian Lillard and Brook Lopez. Interesting. I don't really know if I buy into it. This is still a new pairing between Dame and the Bucks. So there's still time for them to turn this thing around. Their offense was great for the majority of the season. But I do expect them to sort of get things right more after really staggering as of late. As for why they can't, the coaching uncertainty is definitely a factor. There's a little bit of a lack of team chemistry, it seems like. I just talked about the Brook Lopez, Damian Lillard argument there. But I think just as a whole, sort of guys getting yanked around in the rotation. It's going to be interesting to see how Doc Rivers chooses to utilize his assets down the stretch of the season. I have been a big Andre Jackson guy. I think he's capable of playing very good defense, very valuable defense for a team that needs it on the perimeter. And you're going to be facing some really good perimeter guys in order to get to the finals through the Eastern Conference. So I think that he could be valuable, but instead it seems like it's been more so some Jay Crowder minutes, who I think his best years are behind him a little bit, but he's been around the league for a while as the opposite of Andre Jackson. So we'll see there. AJ Green's been getting minutes as of late because he's a nice offensive spark as well for them, but that defensive end really is the main concern with them. They are currently 17th in defensive efficiency, which has actually improved since Doc Rivers has taken over. And they have some cornerstones in Giannis and in Brook Lopez to be able to play a higher level of defense than they currently are. Interestingly enough, I was going through some of the statistics, and Brook Lopez has contested 249 more two-point attempts than Chet Holmgren, who is second in that statistic. Lopez has contested 832 pointers at the break. So interesting to see there. I think that sort of getting back to what has worked with them in the past in terms of having him play that drop coverage is very valuable for them being able to take their defense to another level. I just still have an issue with their backcourt defense. And I think that between Malik Beasley, between Damian Lillard, and whoever else they want to throw out there, I think that Pat Connaughton's been going through a pretty rough stretch as of late. I just don't think they have those impact guys on the defensive end, and they're going to be very reliant on offense to get to the finals, to win the finals. And as we've seen, they are capable of being cold from an offensive point of view. So that definitely worries me. The Timberwolves, they can because their defense is phenomenal. It has been all year. And I think that underrated about them is the home court advantage. They have the second best win percentage at home this year, only behind the Celtics. And, they have tons of talent on the roster. My issue with them and the reason why they wouldn't win the finals is despite the talent, there's definitely a lack of maturity with them, I think. Edwards, not that this is the biggest deal, I want to preface that now, but he was practicing banking in free throws. He did that in the Trailblazers game right before the All-Star break. He talks about what's next for him is getting the lefty jumper down. He's trying to chase Jordan in that sense. He's just having fun with it, so it's not like it's a huge deal, and it's not a concern that I have for Anthony Edwards as a player because I love watching him as a player. But, I think that there's a little bit, if you look at just the interviews between the Anthony Edwards on the Timberwolves versus some of the guys on the Celtics, there's just the Celtics are more so very much bought in on the idea of a championship. Some of these Timberwolves guys are more so just arriving now. And just on the note of maturity, you have that 60-point game with Karl Anthony Towns early in the year where they lose to the Charlotte Hornets. They were supposedly at halftime on their phones looking at Embiid's 70 and saying that they got to get that for Cat. They end up losing that game because Cat is chasing stats at that point. And this is still the same team that got in a fight right before the playoffs last year between Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson. Jaden McDaniels punched a wall in the tunnel. I think it was heading into halftime of that final game of the season. He breaks his hand and he's out for the playoffs there. I do worry a little bit about the maturity of this team, and also late game offense is something that has been a little bit of a concern for them this year. They're 14-9 in clutch games this season, so it's not like they have a bad record or anything there, but their offensive rating is 20th in those minutes. That is something that it feels a little bit awkward in those moments. A lot of ISO, not a ton of passing. Jaden McDaniels I don't think is a very good decision maker with the ball in his hands, and I don't know. I think that it definitely, again, the results haven't been horrendous, but it never really looks great to me. Now, the Suns, very different core than they had a couple years ago. Reason why they can, it's that top-end talent, obviously. Booker, Beal, Durant. Booker and Durant, as far as mid-range shooting, they are second and fourth in most attempts this season, shooting 49 and 47 splits respectively. They're both tremendous at getting to the rim as well and finishing there. They're getting a very good year from Yusuf Nurkic, who's actually been healthy for them. He's super active as a screener and a solid decision maker as far as coming out of those roles. He is tied for third in the most screen assists per game this year. So I really like what I've seen from him. Reason why they can't, they're top heavy and they have health concerns. Beal hasn't played in over 60 games in a season since the 2018-19 year. They made the playoffs once since then, and they got beaten badly in 5 games there, including a game where Joel Embiid didn't even play in that final game. Scored 30 points per game, but he shot very poorly from 3, 21%, and had 4 turnovers a game. Obviously a smaller role on this Phoenix Suns team, but I do think that, it's a lot of ISO heavy with this team. And as far as my concerns, I think that also not having a point guard, a real point guard to run the offense for them, it's a lot of taking turns. It's a lot of ISO ball. I think that it is possible to expose that defensively in the playoffs. last couple teams here. The Sixers, I felt obligated to put them in this, but I really don't see them winning the finals or being a true contender. I mean, if Joel comes back, he is obviously one of the most talented scorers in the league and most efficient offensive players that we've seen in a lot of time. So there's that. I think they have better coaching this year with Nick Nurse over Doc Rivers from last year. And I think that they're just more stable in terms of buy-in and understanding their roles. There's not the James Harden factor of this. And you get a Tyrese Maxey who's a lot more comfortable and confident in what he needs to provide for the team. And he's been tremendous. If Embiid isn't healthy, they're not winning, I don't think, a single playoff round. They've been horrendous on defense. And my initial concern with them was the offensive side of the ball, replacing his scoring. But defensively, they've been terrible without him. And even if he's healthy, can you stay healthy through multiple rounds? It's just the unfortunate part of how Embiid's career has played out, is we've just gotten such little healthy versions of him in the playoffs. Last couple teams here, the Knicks. Anytime you set limits on Jalen Brunson, he exceeds them, and I could see him going superhuman mode to help elevate them. They did a great job of acquiring talent throughout the course of the year. Adding the scorers and the bench pieces in Bogdanovich and Burks. OG Anunoby is a crazy difference maker. We'll get sort of into him. The defense has fallen a bit as of late, but I still think that they are really elite when they are fully healthy. And they were also sort of going through a transition with making these different moves. And I think that takes a little bit of an adjustment period. So OG has also been injured. Should be back early to mid-March. I went through some of the on-off differential with him since just coming to the Knicks. Now, he's only played 14 games. But the team is plus 31.2 net rating when he is on the court. That is significantly the highest in the NBA. Jokic is 20.9. Opposing teams score 23.6 less possessions per 100, 23.6 less points per 100 possessions with him on the court. Now again, only played 14 games so far this year, but the defensive impact this guy has is so valuable to a Knicks team where that's where they sort of have their calling card. As for why they can't, I mean, like I said, I love Jalen Brunson, but they really don't have the same level of star power among the rest of the contenders. He's not on the level of Giannis, Embiid, Tatum, probably even Jimmy Butler as well. And I've said it before, I just really don't trust Julius Randle. He's made the playoffs twice in his career. The first time was in 2021. He averaged 18 points per game on sub 30% from the field, 33% from three when they lost in the first round. And then last year, where he was dealing with an injury, but he averaged just 16.6 points per game on 37 and 26 splits. So it's just a little bit, they're a very fun team and very competitive. As a Celtics fan, I don't want the Celtics to play them, but putting it all together for 4 rounds straight, I just don't see it with them. And then finally, with the Heat, why they can, Heat culture. Like, it's a joke, but also it's something that is a very prominent thing. They just, when you see that logo, when you see Eric Spoelstra on these sidelines of these playoff games, you do trust them. And you have Jimmy Butler leading the charge there, who, he was Superman during those first couple series. He averaged 37 points per game against the Bucks when they dismantled them. So I also think that Bam Adebayo is one of the most underappreciated stars of the league. As far as why they can't, they haven't looked good this year, but they didn't last year either. They just win ugly games. They sort of drag you into the mud and they beat you there. And, I'm scared of them, honestly, because you just never know with that team, with that leader, both the leaders really between Spoelstra and Butler. They're always going to be a scary team. I feel like I shouldn't have them as a contender based off of how they've looked this year, but I have seen this play out before. So that is what I have as far as contenders. I did not have teams like the Thunder, like the Kings, like the Cavs in there. All very good teams as well, but I don't see it with them. And, I can talk about that more in depth at another time, but they are outside of my contenders tier right now. We are going to be taking our second break here, and when we come back, we are going to be talking about the NFL and some franchise tag decisions for teams this offseason, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just wrapped up talking my NBA contenders. Now we are going to switch gears to the NFL, talking about the trade deadline, or the franchise tag decisions, I should say, for these NFL teams coming into the offseason. Tomorrow is the first day of teams being allowed to extend the franchise tag to their players. So I think that I'm just going to go through here with a list of the different players that teams should have to make a decision on. We just got a comment from YouTube saying, I'd rather watch a basketball game in the Euro League or the German League or the Spanish League than the NBA All-Star game because it's not basketball. It's a very fair point. It is very much not a real product at this point, just based off of the competition. But again, I don't know how much there really is to fix on it. I think that it's a little bit of a lost cause, to be honest. But again, we will get more on that, I'm sure, in the coming days as well here, as we are currently without basketball for the next handful of days. But as far as the NFL offseason going forward here, I just wanted to highlight some key teams and players that are going to have big decisions in terms of whether or not to extend the franchise tag or to try and get a long-term deal done or not. So starting off with Chris Jones here, I think that this is a very interesting case. Obviously, the repeat champions in the Kansas City Chiefs, and Chris Jones has been a massive part of that for them. But we saw them last year be unable to work out a long-term extension, went into the year with a holdout, ended up restructuring the contract for the rest of the year, and as we saw at the Super Bowl parade, he wants to stick around, but it's a matter of how much is he going to be able to get from the Chiefs, because as we sort of highlighted, he should be on pace to make borderline record-setting money from an interior lineman position, but I don't know whether or not the Chiefs feel like that is something that they can afford to do with some of the money that's tied up in Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. So it becomes a tough call. The franchise tag alone this year would cost $32.2 million. That's a lot of money to be giving up in, yes, just a one-year span, but it's not figuring anything out for them long term. It also sort of eliminates the possibility of, I think, at least them to be able to bring back L'Jarius Sneed in any way, their cornerback that has been an all-pro, and I think that that's a tough situation really as a whole anyways, regardless of Chris Jones. But I do think that the two sort of play into each other here. Chris Jones should be the priority for the Chiefs. They can get away a little bit with losing, at least be flexible to the idea of potentially losing Sneed because of the development that they've had with Trent McDuffie over the past couple seasons. So, it's an interesting conversation. I think they need to work out a long-term deal with him. Again, $32.2 million is a ton of money to cough up in just the franchise tag alone, and you're just going to be setting yourself up for a similar situation, I think, from last year, where, the way that Chris Jones is at this point, he's 29 years old. This is just about his last offseason to really cash in, and as one of the best interior linemen of his generation, he's going to want to take advantage of that. We saw the deal that Aaron Donald got after winning the Super Bowl with the Rams a couple years ago. Nick Bosa then broke that record again last year. But Chris Jones is a younger guy than Aaron Donald was at that point in his career, and could even say more impactful. Aaron Donald obviously is the class of all class in terms of interior linemen, but he was a little bit on the older end by then. Chris Jones has at least, I would say, 4+ years of playing really great football still. So it's going to be interesting. Again, I don't think that the franchise tag is the best option for them here. If you are just saying, we're going to go all in for this one last season, try and pull off the three-peat, and just worry about other things later, I guess you can sort of get away with that. But I think it would make more sense for them to work out the long-term deal now and make sure that you have that defensive staple on that side of the ball for the time to come. Next up, I have Saquon Barkley. It's interesting here because, Saquon, obviously, the talent level is absolutely there with him, but it's just a matter of A, staying healthy and being productive, and also B, what the current state of the Giants is. And I think that he was incredibly valuable for the Giants in that season a couple years ago where they make the playoffs, they win a playoff game. They were able to sort of resurrect Daniel Jones a little bit because Dable comes in and makes Saquon Barkley such a prominent part of their offense that it almost took a little bit off of Daniel Jones's shoulders, and you were able to get an incredibly productive season from him. But been dealing with injuries that's sort of been all through his career. Last year was dealing with some as well, was not able to get to 1,000 yards, I believe. And I think that at this point, the franchise tag for him would be $12 million. I think that they need to sort of prioritize other things on their team. And I think that it's just a natural parting of ways here. I know it didn't go quite as well as, a lot of Giants fans, and I'm sure as Saquon Barkley would have preferred to. Some cool moments, obviously, but they sort of overdrafted him at the time. And now if you are not willing to give him that long-term contract, which I wouldn't want to either, it means that it probably is not best for your franchise. So I think that they should part ways here. And Saquon, I think, can be an incredibly impactful player somewhere else in the NFL this upcoming year. The Chargers have been mentioned, although they are in a tough salary cap position right now. The Ravens is an incredibly interesting option, the way that they use their run game so much and even their running backs in the passing game. I think that Saquon among a committee could be really good there. Buccaneers is also a sneaky, very interesting option for me. So we will see on that note. Next up, T. Higgins. I think that the Bengals should absolutely extend the franchise tag for him. Is it what he's necessarily going to want? Probably not. But they are among the top of the league in terms of cap space. You have Joe Burrow. His contract is jumping up to $10 million this year, taking the 5th-year option. Starting in next season, the 25-26 season, because next year's 24-25, so 25-26, it's going to jump up to $25 million plus. Through the 2029 to 2030 season, it's going to be $48 million in that final year. And you still also have to figure out what you're going to do long-term with Jamar Chase, who is also going to be looking for a contract extension shortly. I think that you have to, if you're the Bengals, capitalize on the opportunity now. Joe Burrow, hopefully going to be coming back healthy next season, and you have given the Chiefs the most run for their money as far as any team currently in the NFL has, really. And I think that you sort of have to capitalize on this opportunity where this is the last year before Burrow gets really expensive. You have Jamar Chase before his contract extension as well. And while it obviously wouldn't be a bad thing to get T. Higgins on a long-term contract. I think that he's going to be asking for more money than they're likely going to be willing to pay. And if you get to a couple years from now and all your money is tied up between Burrow and 2 receivers, I think that that really hurts the rest of your roster. I would go with the franchise tag, try and make the most of this season. The money will still likely be there for T. Higgins a year from now as well, and you get another chance to sort of run it back with this core, because the Bengals were really hitting their stride before Joe Burrow got hurt about halfway through the season after coming into the year with that calf injury that was holding him back some. So I think that, going forward, this is the best way for them to handle it. Moving on to a name in Mike Evans with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We just mentioned them. They have a lot of cap space. It's really interesting to see how this is going to play out. He said that, Mike Evans that is, said that he wants to know whether or not Baker Mayfield is going to be back before committing to re-signing with the Buccaneers. They've been off, Mike Evans and the Buccaneers have, on a number as far as their contract for a long time, dating back to early in the season. They pretty much knew they weren't going to come to a contract extension, and I think that Mike Evans, not necessarily, but like a little bit trying to preserve his consecutive seasons with 1,000 yards. I mean, he wants to make sure that there's security in, I think he just wants to be playing winning football as well. He wants to be playing with a quarterback that can, actually produce for him. He's dealt with a little bit of a roller coaster from the quarterback position throughout his career. And, at this point, I mean, he has the ring, so it's not like that's necessarily it for him, but I don't think he wants to be wasting the final years of his career with sort of subpar quarterback play. Ultimately, as far as this goes, I don't think the franchise tag is going to be the way this plays out. I think they're going to re-sign Baker, and I think that they can work out a contract between him and the organization going forward. I think that would be a perfectly capable move. You don't get to see really receivers stick around, or players in general in the sports world stick around quite as long nowadays, and I think that it would be cool to see Mike Evans sort of end up as a lifetime Buccaneer. So if I were them, I would be trying to work out a long-term contract. Last couple names here. Justin Madubuike, the interior lineman for the Ravens. I think you have to keep him. They don't have a ton of room as far as financial flexibility. They are still not in the red, but only $13-14 million according to Pro Football Focus in terms of their cap projections. And it's interesting because with the Ravens here, obviously it ends up being a disappointing loss, but it feels like they should have, capitalized on that year. And I still think that you do have a good amount of young pieces that are on that roster. And as far as their upcoming free agents, I don't think that they are necessarily all too handicapped. Now, again, it's not like you have a ton of salary cap to sort of navigate all of this, but I think that they can be competitive once again. And I think that Madubuike has been an incredible player for them over the past couple years, and they should be trying to run it back. I mean, again, the Chiefs weren't necessarily, untouchable this year. I know that it feels that way a little bit after the way that it all played out, but the Ravens were, even in that game, they just couldn't get past themselves. So, gonna be interesting. As I look this up here, Patrick Queen is also an upcoming free agent, so that's something that is going to be tough. Geno Stone as well, and a couple linemen. So, I mean, they do have a good number of guys that they're going to have to figure it out here. I think that Madubuike is the one that they should, try and get under contract at least for next season. Roll the dice, try it again, and sort of evaluate from there. And then the final name that I have on this list is Josh Allen, not the one from Buffalo, but the one from Jacksonville. I think you have to get a long-term contract done with him. He is such an animal. Like, he is so fun to watch coming off of the edge. I think that for this Jaguars team that is, definitely faltered last year. You had some concerns, but also there were obviously injuries involved as far as Trevor Lawrence. So the year didn't go quite as planned. But Josh Allen is an absolute monster. You have the room to go and get him, and I think that you have to get him on a long-term deal. So yeah, that is all I have as far as names. We will be sure to keep you updated during the course of the week what these teams actually do decide to do. But until then, we're going to be taking our final break. When we come back on the other side, talking some college basketball and the big weekend that we just had. So stick with us. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment here. We are going to be talking some college basketball. This weekend we had some big games, but also we had the College Basketball Selection Committee for the tournament get together, and they gave their seeds for the top 16 teams in the country. So got some interesting conversation points to come out of that, including one that did not age very well whatsoever. But important to note that this was a decision based off of their resumes as of Saturday afternoon. They did this at 12:30, so we had some events that directly came after it that definitely sparked some conversation in the college basketball community. So we will get into all of that. And again, just final note here, this isn't a projection of how the rest of the season will play out, but this was how things were as it stood on Saturday afternoon. So, that being said, they gave Purdue as the number 1 overall seed in the upcoming tournament. UConn, Houston, and Arizona rounded out the rest of the 1 seeds, and really there was immediate debate here about UConn versus Purdue. UConn has been the number 1 seed for the past handful of weeks. As far as the AP poll, they'd been number 1 ranked, but Purdue technically had a better resume going into it. They had more quadrant 1 wins going into Saturday. Immediately after that, UConn played Marquette, who Marquette ranked number 4 in the AP poll. The selection committee had them as a 2 seed. The Huskies play Marquette at home and absolutely demolished them. They won by 28 points. That was, according to ESPN, that was the largest margin of victory between 2 top 5 teams in a conference matchup in the AP poll history. So it was just an absolute... I gotta stay PG here as far as my language, but they kicked some behind, I guess you could say, in the most PG way possible. but a massive statement win for them. You have to imagine a little bit that seeing that game took place right after the committee did this exercise on national TV, of course, that they used that as a little bit of motivation as far as them saying, well, they don't think we're the best team in the country. Let's show them. This is, of course, the defending champions in the Huskies. So a massive statement win from them there. Just about has to be the best win in the country this season, in my opinion. Then you have Sunday take place where Purdue lost to an unranked Ohio State team that actually fired their head coach on Wednesday. We're playing under an interim head coach, and this was their first game since then. So now, as far as resume and all of that, UConn is now 9-2 versus Quad 1. This actually counts as a Quad 1 win for Purdue as well, interestingly enough, because on the road in Ohio State just cracked enough of it, I suppose. We'll see how long that sort of holds up, but they are 9-3 in Quad 1. So we are going to talk some big picture stuff here with UConn, but before we do, just some thoughts on Purdue and this loss. It's clear from the online reactions, and we've talked about this in past episodes, about the reputation that they have. The nation and college basketball fans they don't trust Purdue with their recent bad losses in the tournament over the past few years. Obviously now they have lost to double-digit seeds in each of the past 3 tournaments, last year being the worst one yet, being upset as a 1 seed to the 16-seeded Fairleigh Dickinson. So the nation doesn't really have a lot of faith in the Boilermakers, and I don't blame them either. Purdue has now lost 3 games this season, all of which have come to unranked teams on the road. So they've won the big games, they've showed up to those, and they've looked good in those, but it's, again, you just don't have a feeling that they're not capable of getting upset once again. A statistic that we've talked about in the past is the historic rate that these top 10 teams are losing on the road to unranked opponents. And following this loss for Purdue, they are now 37-37 to unranked teams. So they were briefly above 500. They are now back down to 500 exactly. So that's improved since the last time we've touched on this subject. But still very interesting that we are seeing these top-ranked teams lose as many games as they are to these unranked opponents. It just goes to show the madness that we are in for, I guess no pun intended, but a little bit as well, that we are due for come March when this all sort of plays out. So in this game specifically, it was Purdue's offense getting really stale down the stretch. Ohio State, they didn't let any easy entry passes get into Edey. They forced some of these other players to play around the perimeter and sort of work their way into their packed defense. And the supporting cast, I think, for Purdue is definitely better than they were last season, but, it's still very Edey reliant and starting lineup reliant because they get just such little support coming off of the bench for them. They are not very deep at all, and I think that is a big concern from them. They are now officially, as the rankings came out just before we started the show, they are officially number 3. Houston has surpassed them for that number 2. Now, I don't know. It's hard to say it's an overreaction because it's only one spot, and Houston is a great team. But again, Purdue still has the more impressive wins within the first 2 quadrants in comparison to a Houston. But everybody, I feel like, myself included, and, sure, the experts necessarily don't feel all that way as like themselves, but I think that this is definitely a concerning look for Purdue headed into the tournament. So if the committee was to go through the exercise today, I think there's no doubt UConn would be the number 1 overall seed. Again, you're arguing about very little, but that is sort of my case for that. Now, how likely is it that UConn repeats as the national champs? They are currently the betting favorites. They are plus 450 on FanDuel when I checked before the show. It's interesting because they're actually off to a better overall start this year than they were last year. And last year, they came out even hotter at the very beginning of the season, but then sort of fell into a little bit of a struggle, mid through the season. UConn now are playing a tremendous game of basketball, obviously, capitalizing on that win against Marquette. And it's interesting to see how Dan Hurley has sort of kept this program afloat here after losing 3 of their most impactful guys to the NBA during the draft: Jordan Hawkins, Adama Sanogo, and Andre Jackson. Donovan Clingan, who came in as a freshman from Connecticut, was definitely a very interesting prospect, and like the idea of him coming into UConn at the time, it seemed like he was sort of vying for minutes behind a very impactful Sanogo, obviously. And he probably could have entered into the draft and been maybe a late first round pick last year, but he decides to come back to Storrs, I think is where UConn is located, and he's been great for them, just filling the role exactly how he needs to. He is a defensive anchor in the paint, and then he's a great screener and roller on the offensive side of the ball. So again, he's maybe not quite as consistent of a scorer as Sanogo was. Sanogo just put up big numbers for them, but I think that he's still a very interesting draft prospect, could definitely be a lottery pick this year. And as far as this season goes, he's looks a lot more mature in terms of the knowledge and understanding what he needs to do when he is out there on the court. Tristan Newton is another name that obviously has improved a ton, taking on a larger role for this season. He's been the facilitator, the playmaker for them, and he is their second leading scorer. Their leading scorer, interestingly enough, is now Cam Spencer. This is a guy that transferred in from Rutgers last season, and he is one of the best shooters in the country, one of the best players in his conference, and I think that, definitely has the experience as a fifth-year player and is ready for a bigger role on a more impactful team that he's been on in past seasons. Stephen Castle has been great for them as well. His development over the course of the year has been a very positive thing for them, both currently and for him in terms of the people that were high on him, I should say, in terms of the NBA draft. His shooting and his efficiency has definitely seen a bump over the past couple months, and the decisiveness, I think, is also something that really stands out now than it did early in the year coming off of the injury. And you can just see coming off that injury as well, he looks a lot more athletic now as well. I think he's a very good prospect for the NBA, and I think they have a great shot at doing this repeat. Obviously, it's never easy in March Madness to, in these one and done situations, be able to bring it game in, game out, but I think that they have more depth than a lot of teams do in the country. I think that they have the star power. They have a very well-rounded offense as well. I don't think that they're too reliant on any one player in particular. Obviously, Newton runs and initiates a lot of the offense for them, but you have those moments with Castle where, he's been in and out of the starting lineup, but he can definitely lead the charge as well. And then you just have consistency. Like, Clingan is consistent, Cam Spencer is consistent, and I think that they have a great shot at running it back. As of right now, I think that my other top contenders up there would be UNC. I know they've been struggling a little bit after that Duke game, but I still have a lot of faith in them. I think that their defense is elite, and they can definitely get themselves together. Houston, like I talked about as well, an incredible team this year. And Baylor is another team as well that I have a ton of fun watching. I think that Baylor's deep. I think that during the beginning of the year, I watched them more so for their freshman prospects in Yves Misi and Jacoby Walter, but it's been some of the other guys, Nunn, Bridges, that have really stood out to me as impact guys as well. Ray J. So all these guys I think are very impressive, and I think could also make a run at this thing in March Madness as well. Last couple thoughts here, just on some sort of other things. I mean, I didn't want to harp too much on the committee's decisions because there is still a lot of time left in the season. This wasn't projections. We will definitely be sure to get back around to some of this seeding stuff as the year goes on. But Kentucky's a team that I've had a ton of interest in this year because of the amount of NBA prospects that they have on their roster. They had a stretch from late January into last Saturday, where they had lost 4 of 6 games. They gave up 91.3 points per game in those losses. Even when I first talked about Kentucky, defense is sort of immediately where you have to go to with that conversation. And John Calipari has been very heavily criticized because of the performance of this team as of late. But a couple big wins for them this week against conference opponents. They beat Ole Miss at home and then actually went on the road to knock off number 13 Auburn. Auburn was a 4 seed according to the selection committee as of Saturday, and they did a really good job on that defensive side of the ball, where they held Ole Miss to 63, Auburn to 59 in those wins. If this team, I don't consider them to be a real contender, but I would like to see them make a run. I feel like we've been a little bit short on, top tier NBA prospects getting their March Madness moments. The Kentucky Wildcats, I think, have a chance to go on at least a little bit of a run, but going to have to, level their game up on the defensive side of the ball first before that happens. And we saw it at least this past week. Let's see how long they can actually sustain this for. And then finally, Rick Pitino had some incredibly interesting comments after their loss to Seton Hall. He killed his team talking about how they're not athletic enough, their lateral quickness specifically, they referenced on a couple times. He even dropped one of the names of his players in particular about, being a good effort guy, but not athletic enough, not able to move quickly enough laterally. He said it's been 2 months trying to get his guys to make bounce passes, and he really did kill them. He said it's not the job itself, it's the team that he currently has. So really, you don't see coaches really go after their players as much as Pitino did in this instance. But they started the season pretty well, and they are 2-8 in their last 10 games, and it's just wild stuff. I really do recommend you go look at the clips of that because it was a very interesting moment. Again, never really see that anymore in modern day sports. You had Kyle Parry saying, "Blame me, don't blame my players," and then Pitino on the other end is like, my guys just aren't good enough. So that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show, and we will see you tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that crazy.